One of the best reasons to shoot digitally is the immediacy of the results. And this is never more noticeable than with photo shoots of kids. They love to see the images right away. It makes them feel like they're part of producing the image. And being as kids actually have a shorter attention span than most photographers I know, this is a great way to keep them in the shoot and keep them from getting bored. Here's a fun image that we've created of a handsome young man that's a light-hearted portrait that not only expresses his sense of humor and personality, but is a real treasure for his parents. Lighting for this shot is both simple and complex. Simple because we've chosen an on-the-lens axis type of illumination for our subject that features a softbox placed above the lens axis and another one placed just below. But complex because we want a nice, clean, white background so that we don't have to fall into that fix-it in Photoshop trap and spend hours repairing images that would take only minutes to light properly. Now let's start at the background with this shot. When we want a nice, even, clean white background, we need to keep three things in mind. 1. Use white paper. Be sure to use a true white colored background paper, not an Arctic white or super white, because those have an element of blue in them to snap up the contrast of black and white images. We don't want any source of blue in our background at all. We want clean, pure, neutral white. 2. Use a quality lens. We'll have a lot of light bouncing off that background paper and heading into our lens. And if not controlled, that light can severely reduce our contrast and our color saturation. Using a premium quality lens, in fact the best you can afford, will yield a high performance and good image quality that will hold up to any bright background light. 3. No blowouts. Be sure not to blow out your background with extreme overexposure. Some photographers that are used to shooting high key on color negative film would blow out their background by 2 or 3 stops over its normal exposure. This can be a big mistake with digital capture. Take a look at a portion of an example image here with our background only 1/2 stop overexposed, compared to that same portion with the background 2 stops overexposed. Notice the difference in contrast and color saturation between those two? You can light your background nice and even using various lighting techniques, but the easiest and most effective way is to use 2 identical soft boxes, one placed on either side of the background paper, to make that background as even as possible. Because our subject is probably going to move around during this photo shoot, we've chosen to use a 22 by 32 inch softbox to allow us to light the entire width of the background paper. Now our goal here is to have very even light, in fact, no more than 1/3 stop difference between any 2 points on our background. Here's how we're going to do it. Start off by making sure that your paper has a relatively straight and even edge to it. Then pull that sweep down so that the edge is 5 to 6 feet away from where the vertical part of the background is. Then tape it to the floor. Next, place the 2 background lights at exactly the same distance away from the paper. You'll see here that I've placed 1 foot of the light stand on the corner of the paper and another foot along the paper's edge. Do the same thing on the other side too. Using the corner of the sweep paper for a placement guide is smart because if at any time during the shoot you're to bump one of these backlights, you'll know exactly where to replace them to keep your lighting even. Next, adjust the elevation of these soft boxes so that their center is right on your lens axis. And aim the center of each softbox at the far vertical edge of the paper. This will provide the right amount of overlap when we fire both those strobes together. But let's meter them individually first. With a pencil, make a light mark right where the lens axis meets the paper. This will be our metering point for balancing the background lights. Now place your flash meter on the mark and point the dome exactly into your lens and take a test reading from only one of the background lights. Adjust the power of this one strobe so it's a 1/2 stop less than your working aperture. And for the image I'm about to create, I've chosen a relatively shallow depth of field, so I'm going to have f8.0 as my working aperture. So I've balanced out the exposure value of that one softbox to be f5.6.5. Now we'll do the same thing with the other background strobe, firing all by itself and measuring from the same metering point. Now this one's at f5.6.5. And when we combine both of those background lights together, they'll give us about f8.5 worth of exposure value. That's a half a stop over our working aperture, so we've got a half stop over exposure, and that's right where we want it. For digital capture high key, we like to have a half stop over exposure on our white background paper. Now, how even really is our lighting? Well, we know that at our metering point with both strobes firing, we get f8.5. But what about on the edges and corners? Well, if we measure here at the top of our frame, we find out we're also at f8.5. And how about here down at the bottom? f8.6. We want to make sure that if you pick any 2 points on our background, you'll see there's no greater difference than about 1/3 of an f-stop. That's nice, even, high-key lighting. An easier way of measuring the evenness of your background illumination is with a spot meter. Now, when the dome of your incident meter measures f8.5 worth of light that's falling onto it, you can expect the light that's bouncing off of that white background paper to read somewhere around f22 when you measure it with your spot meter. Now, this does depend on the brand and type of background paper you're using, but it'll be somewhere around f22. Using your spot meter for this type of measurement is very easy. First, start on your lens axis and then point the spot meter at as many different sections as you like and compare the results. And if you discover that the outside edges of your background are now darker than the center of your background by more than 2/10 of an f-stop, you need to use a little feathering technique on those soft boxes in the back. And here's what to do. When your edges are darker than your center, take your left background light and feather it just a little bit to the left. And take your right background light and feather it a little bit to the right. That should give you the evenness that you're looking for. And remember, a little bit of feathering goes a long way in this kind of lighting. The opposite's true as well. If your edges are brighter than your center, then feather those soft boxes in the middle a little bit more. It'll work out for you with a little bit of practice. Being as we're about to photograph a busy and wiggly 8-year-old boy, we're going to do ourselves a favor and make a feet box on the studio floor so that our subject knows where to keep his feet in order to get a good picture. We are going to place the rear limit of the feet box about 9 feet away from the background and make it 3 feet wide and 1 foot deep. This will give our subject plenty of room for movement, and it'll also keep him on the background and properly illuminated by our main and fill light. We've chosen to use a small format digital SLR for this shoot, fitted with a mid-range zoom lens. This is going to give me about 85 to 105 millimeters worth of focal length to work in, and it's also going to push me back about 9 feet from my subject. This is going to give my subject enough space so he doesn't feel confined, and he can get a little loose if he wants to. Now, if you don't have this kind of camera to background space in your studio, don't worry, you can do it in less space, but you're probably going to have to be a little more careful with your lighting, and you may find out that your feet box will have to be smaller too. Camera elevation for this shot is right at our subject's eye line, so that we're right in on our subject's personality. Now let's put together an over-under lighting setup to provide a straight-on contemporary look. We'll use a 32 by 42 inch softbox on a heavy stand with an extension arm, rotated horizontal so it's right on the lens axis, then elevated up so it's barely out of the camera's frame when it's tipped down about 15 degrees or so. This light is placed only about 5 feet away from the center of the feet box. Next, for some fill light, we'll place a 22 by 32 inch softbox, also in its horizontal position and centered with the lens axis, just below the frame and tipped up about 15 degrees. Now, let's meter the main light all by itself so that we can adjust its power to equal our working aperture of f80. Then either shut off the main light or swing it out of the way so that we can measure just the fill light all by itself. Now, the fill light in this setup is going to have a value that's a half a stop less than our main light. So we're looking for f5, 6.5 out of our fill light. Next step is, of course, swing that main light back in or turn it back on so that we have f8 coming out of the main and f5, 6.5 coming out of the fill light. Together they're going to combine and give us somewhere around f8.5. Now, you know what we need to do. Reduce the power of the main and the fill equally so that we're right back to our working aperture of f80. This means that we'll have a really nice light quality, and it'll also allow our little dude to walk around anywhere inside that feet box and still be covered with some great light and be no more than 1/10 of an f-stop off of a dead-on exposure. As a quick review, we use two 22 by 32 inch softboxes to provide a very even illumination on our white background paper that disappears when we overexpose it by half of a stop. Then we made a feet box that's 3 feet wide by 1 foot deep and at least 8 feet away from the background for our subject to move around in during the shoot. And finally, we used a medium softbox above our lens for a main and a small size softbox below our lens for a fill, with the fill light being 1/2 stop less than our main light. And we end up with a series of fun and client-pleasing high-key portraits. Thank you so much for joining us today for our approach to Level 2 lighting for digital capture. If some of the setups or some of the terminology we've used in this video still seem a little foreign to you, try going back and watching the video again. You'll be surprised how much more info you pick up the second time around. And if you need some reinforcements on the basics about digital portraiture lighting, make sure you check out our Digital Portraiture Basics DVD. And for more information on digital photography, we have our best-selling Pro Digital Basics DVD that covers topics you need to be comfortable with, like histograms, monitor calibration, and applying printer profiles. Other Shoot Smarter titles include our Color Controls DVD and Calibrating Your Flash Meter for incredibly accurate exposures. All of the current and future Will Crockett DVDs are available through your local authorized U.S. Mamiya dealer or online at shootsmarter.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time around.